this virtual stuff it's intense. For those of us that like doing things in person,
Yes.
no, it feels so isolating. And I know you know that. I know you know it too.
Yeah. And how's how are your kids doing with the virtual schooling and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Harper, on one hand, she does really well with it because she's organized and she's just, I mean, she can handle the online part of it, but on the other hand, it's so intense and she's so exhausted and drained and just feels so alone. That's the only way to put it. Yeah. It's
I
just so hard, and I just feel so bad for them because, just the act of, you know, doing the normal high school, things is just,
right.
yeah, it's hard. No friends, no hanging out.
Well, I hear you. I've got a 5-year-old who is very A-type and very social who, she wants her best friend. She's seen her best friend once in the last 6 months, and
Oh
she's,
my
you know,
gosh.
and she's missing that person. And I've got an 8-year-old with IED, intermittent explosive
Mm-hmm.
disorder, and transitions are not easy, right? And what is
Mm-hmm.
COVID time? Not a new transition every day,
Every day.
right? Like,
It's so exhausting for the parents too, because just keeping up with it.
yeah. And then Erin's trying to
And
TA
then
for the middle
Aaron,
school
yeah.
from home. So she sits next to Eden, who's doing her schoolwork, and then she's on her Zoom with her students and going back and forth. And I'm there Monday and Tuesday and half of Wednesday to help, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird time.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, thank you
What do
for.
you, yeah, what do you do Thursday and Friday then? Are you home then too, or?
No, I mean Thursday and Friday. So half of Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I'm at Common Ground doing
Got it.
my work. Right.
Yep. Yep. Got it.
My students are on lockdown, but my board still expects me to get something done.
And what
And
can you do? Like students are just, I'm sure you've had lots of conversation with students too. Our UWL students, and they're not doing well either. Their mental health is in the tank. Students that don't learn well this way online.
right.
Um, we did a survey with our public health students this week, and they're a hot mess. There's no other way to describe it. They are coming undone. I just had a kid that just got out of Gunderson. He admitted himself
Oh, wow.
with such severe depression and like some suicide ideation stuff. He just got out of the hospital yesterday. Neat kid. Another, a lot of them have moved home to help families. I've got two students that they homeschool virtual school their younger siblings because the parents work. Oh gosh, yeah, it's a
The
lot.
challenge my colleague and I are both having. So our usual students all have Zoom fatigue, so they're not
Mm-hmm.
showing up for it.
Yep.
Our building's closed, so the ones that are off
Okay.
campus can't come to our building. And then I had 5 students last year. 3 have graduated. One has dropped out of Western Tech, and the other had a rough summer and is not coming back. Right.
Oh.
So, like, how do you reach out? Like, how do I reach out to students who are in crisis and need help if I don't have a way of communicating with them? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I do things like this that are virtual, and I hope it kind of
Mm-hmm.
makes its way through the interwebs and finds the person that it needs to find. And
Yep.
I've got my one Western Tech student, and we meet for lunch 3 times a week.
And then hopefully that student tells another student or another student, or we're doing a little series in our because of the survey we just did. We're adding your link, your stuff that you're doing onto our resources, because we have a lot of students that are very Public health, we talk a lot about spirituality. It's one of the five,
Nice.
it's one of the areas of dimensions of wellness. And, in these times where they can't even go to church, or they're not even, I don't know, like, so we're adding you to our resource list that goes out
Awesome.
this next week to students, as a way
Okay.
to connect and hopefully, yeah, so we'll see.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Like Heather did a self-care thing with us a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago. I did a conversation with Chauncey Turner from the Human Rights Commission yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Talking with you, I got Brian McLaurin coming in to do a thing. And then my friend James Allison, who is a scholar, the only openly gay Catholic priest in the world not censored by the Vatican.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Every time I talk to him, you been fired yet? Nope.
Wow.
But he does a lot of work around mimetic theory and how we do scapegoating and violence to maintain order, and how do we subvert the scapegoating mechanism, so we can unpack some of the George Floyd stuff through that. So
wow. Ooh, I want, when he's coming, I want to know. I want to listen. I'll join in. Mm-hmm.
Cool. I'll get you on the list for that one. Make
Mm-hmm.
sure. But so COVID, what do we call this? COVID, sexuality, and spirituality, or something of that. So
Yep.
obviously a very easy to handle topic.
Yep.
Not too many people don't have feelings about these things.
Yeah.
So as I was thinking about today, I recognized two things. And the first one is, I don't even know where to begin. So I'm going to kick it over to you in a second. And the second thing is, I'm a Southerner, and as progressive as I like to think I am, I keep encountering that I'm much more conservative on things than I think I am. So
yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who probably are in the same spot. Like, we think we're very progressive, and then you kind of realize as you get older that I have not thought things through as much as I think I should have. I need to reevaluate some stuff.
Yep.
So what is the state of sexuality in COVID?
Yeah. Well, COVID has taken sexuality to a new covert level again. So, we are sexual beings from the time that we are born to the time that we die. If you believe in the sexuality model, that sexuality is so much more than the physical acts of sex, but sexual beings. So first and foremost, the number one thing that we see universally from 0 to 110 years of age in a pandemic like this, where it brings nothing but isolation, the number one thing we see is like the lack of touch. So skin hunger is one of the biggest things that we see being reported across all sectors. And so skin hunger, particularly when you look, like if we were just to talk about teenagers, and if we went from 12 to 25, if we took it to that span, the number one thing that teens are experiencing is this like cleavage away from their adults in their life, their guardians, and towards friends and towards a group. And so this is why it's very normal when you see teenagers hanging out on a weekend, and they might be hammocking, or they might be watching movies, and there's usually like a dog pile, so they'll hammock together. It's not sexual, it's just the physical touch of it. It's when a group of young people are just hanging out, there's just a lot of closeness, and again, adults want to sexualize that, and it's just a very normal developmental stage for teens as they're moving away from clinging to their parents or their guardians, and literally physically from the nursing stage to the young child, and then as they move into teens, they're just pushing away, and then they usually push into friendships. And again, it doesn't have to be a sexual friendship, but it's just a touch of any sort. So we know that group, universally, we have, and there's been pockets of people doing research with teens during the pandemic, college students, And so we know that that isolation is there. And so just the skin hunger. If you were to look at an older adult population, we have seen report after report about how, like in long-term care facilities or in hospitals, individuals that are dying without having had their loved ones near them. There's no touching, there's no hand holding. Hospice is very isolating, watching through a screen, a window, a video screen, and literally watching their loved ones die and then just not having that lasting hugging, touching. And so again, in an older adult facility like long-term care facilities where we're moving, you know, if you are a caregiver of someone, you're constantly coming in. So even in those facilities, we've seen during the pandemic that, you know, they're not getting their normal massages or, you know, staff. There's a much different protocol happening with staff. So just touch. So universally, individuals going without that. And what that does then, you know, when we look at like psychological levels, social things, interaction, self-worth, body image, all those sorts of things start to have an impact on a person that you had that, and then all of a sudden you don't have that. And that might be for 1 to 5, now 6 months, if people are really just sort of in these, you know, quarantine isolation situations. And then if they are sick and they have had COVID, or you think of families that have gone through positive tests, literally those people are put into a separate bedroom, bathroom, food situation, and they are isolated. And so what that does for our spirit, our spirituality, and connection with ourselves and others, you know, and then you just add the other layers of just working adults and having children, or working adults without children, the added layers of just stress and emotional strain with our multiple pandemics, not just COVID, but our overt acts of violence and racism and politics added to that. People's levels of how they're coping might look very extreme, very isolating, and or then in other pockets, we have extreme behaviors where solicitation of sexual acts is still very high, and in fact some would say peaked in some places. So where people are seeking out and paying for sexual acts because again they may not be receiving that, and again it has to be a lot more covert because of COVID. You've seen some organizations that have done a lot of education about that on their platforms or social media platforms, their outreach to their communities that might be sex worker communities. So individuals that are, again, they may be reaching out in other ways to fulfill that need and that skin hunger, that self awareness, that, you know, how do you, one of the things that we've talked about recently too is just a lot of report, and there's been a big study that has been done recently on this about relationships. How do you start a new relationship during a pandemic when you're in masks, you're not going to your normal physical spaces, whether that's class. So if we're talking about college students, where do we normally meet? We meet at class, we meet at social functions, we meet at extracurricular things, parties, clubs, you know, bars, whatever it looks like. And so, or church and spiritual places and spaces where you're physically interacting, watching body language. The masks and the social distancing isolates people from those normal interactions of flirting and having conversations. And so yeah, it's
communities, how do these, like the sexual minority communities, like how do they support each other at a time when you can't be in a physical space together? Like I talked to Alicia and Deb at, oh, video is frozen, isn't it? Sorry, I'll try that again. I talked to Alicia and Deb at the Seven River Center, and they can't do programming right now. So that whole, the LGBT community locally is not getting much in the way of programming, even virtually programming. My wife's classroom, I've shared my wife's story of being a bisexual woman. Like she was lucky to have a classroom where the teachers and the aides were all bisexual women. So they were a big support for each other. well, now they check in for 10 minutes at the end of the day, which is not the same as having a whole day to be supportive of each other. So I think about these communities of people who are in a minority as far as their sexual preferences and their relationship styles and their just human relationships go, and the spaces for connection are minimal. Like we're humans are we are communal. Like we have this myth of Western capitalism that we're all individuals, but we're not, right? We are communal people, and we need communities. And what are the spaces that you're seeing of how people make community in this, and is it sufficient?
First of all, it's people are making do. Is it sufficient? Probably not. So there are people that are finding space. So that could be online, that could be chat rooms, that could be, like I mentioned, like individuals seeking out other websites or sex workers or soliciting sexual things in other ways that are maybe much out of their realm. And or if they had a support group to begin with, they probably are seeking out just different ways of communicating with them, whether that's social distancing, hiking, walking, coffee at a, separated, or online, checking in 10 minutes. And again, it kind of has like it works for a while and then it kind of drops off. We see that in other support group communities too, with other needs. And that looks like really challenging for those individuals as well, because it kind of has this layer of a screen of like not being able to read people's body language. And so people and they'll turn off their screens and especially if it's young people, teens and young college students. Again, if you bring them together, screens off sometimes. And so you have a whole another layer of, I don't want to be vulnerable on a screen, or I can't be because of who's around me. I can't talk about these things because who's around me and going in and out of this space. And so it has it's a good attempt and it is working if people really need it. But what we find is probably more people just figuring out, oh, that doesn't work, it doesn't meet my needs. And then they're kind of left sunken with, they're grappling with maybe coming, like when you think about college students, when you come to college, this is often a chance where students figure out, I can be out. I can figure out who I am. I'm out of my household. I can be open.
Oh.
Okay, sorry, my dog is going crazy. That's Sandra. Okay, so just tell her I'm on a call. Okay, don't just yell at her. Just say thank you. Okay, so what I was saying is that then they find a space that will work for them or that doesn't. And when it doesn't, I'm going to figure out how to, and I was saying how a lot of times college is a space where students will come out, and or high school students. Maybe at school, I'm a different person than I am at home because I can be a little bit more who I am, or how that shifts. So we see students really struggling with that. And again, that leads to just more isolation, more anxiety, more depression. That is some of our bigger fears in public health and in the mental health field, is that the isolation leading to not seeking help, not going into the Pride Center, not going to a support group after school, not going to my church that's very open and affirming, or my club that supports those things. And so what happens is it's the next wave of the pandemic, that 6 months after we've started what we've got going now, we're going to see more and more folks dealing with this. I mean, in our region alone, we've seen spikes in suicides, we've seen spikes in harming, we've seen spikes in the hospital admits, counselors' offices that have a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 week waiting period to get in. And so I think in our community, what we can do is continue to offer, even though it might look like this and online, we have to continue to offer it. And then when possible, continue to bring small groups of people together. So it might be 6 people, but in a semicircle outside, or on a hike, and of course, as we move into the winter, it's only going to worsen. We started this at the end of winter, and then we outdoors provided a lot more opportunity for people to meet at a park or hike. But it is now we're in a situation where we're going to be heading into the hardest months, where we also fight seasonal affect disorder and more isolation, more indoors, less sunlight. You add all those things together, and then isolation from people's spiritual spaces, and then their connections as humans. As you mentioned, we're tribal. We are instinctually need people. We need other humans and those interactions. And
we form each
again,
other.
yeah. And it's affirming, and that affirming doesn't always happen the same way on a screen that it does in person. And we just know that. I mean, so I think we have to do these attempts, but know that full well people aren't going to show up to it, because they can't in that physical space say the things that they want to or feel safe. With Zoom, there's this added extra feature of I'm constantly worried that I'm being recorded or recorded or screenshot or photographed or what do you call it when you take a screenshot of your, I don't know, I think it's called screenshot. But so teens and young adults are very worried about that, of being outed, not being supported. Someone might take my picture and then, oh, here, look who I saw in this support group. Like, there's just another layer that it's different if you go to an in-person thing. And so I think, and then as you mentioned too, just Zoom fatigue, online fatigue. People are like, oh, it's just another thing online. And it just reminds us that we need that physical closeness of other people.
Like, I think about the students at Common Ground between the two organizations, and they've got school online, family online, their media is online, clubs and orgs are online, and now we're saying, oh, throw some church in there as well, right? Like, I mean, at some point, if my students say, I can't come to your meditation group because I need it, but it's just another thing, like, I get it. Like, it is just another thing. And that's a whole other conversation, how turning digital space into sacred space, that everyone I know in theology is trying to figure that out, and no one has the answer. But I do wonder a bit about this Zoom world that's forcing these kind of conversations online. Does it in any way provide an opportunity for people to go deep, right? Like, if you're coming out and you've only got one person to talk to through a Zoom screen, does that actually allow a person to have a chance to go a little bit deeper in the conversation? I just met with a student for lunch this afternoon who was a young gay man, and he was talking about, like, his big challenge was the gay culture that he grew up in was a small town. There was one bar, right? And it was a hookup culture. So there was no conversations, there was no mentoring, there was no, like, yes, you're sexual, but also we're adults when we get coffee and read books. Like, so does the Zoom thing allow a chance for people to go a little bit deeper with this journey?
It can, for sure. And we know that online support has been a vital aspect for individuals when they're coming out, especially if there was an anonymous feature where I could be anonymous, come out, share my story, and not be judged. And now, so there's these anonymous spaces that can be even more beneficial. And then there's these other spaces where, okay, now people are seeing me. And now, so the pro and con of it is that you can get smaller groups together and in smaller chat rooms or smaller features, and they can have those more in-depth conversations and go to some of those places. And yet then there's going to be those individuals that are like, I'm not going to go there on a screen. I want that to be a private one-on-one with someone, or in a small group that's set up with very clear ground rules, or I want to do it anonymously and I want an anonymous place online. So we've seen an uptick in, like, the online counseling world, where people are reaching out to online counselors or online chat counselors. I think we'll continue to see that rise. And thank goodness. And again, I think most counselors would say the quality of it is it's just different. The teens that I've talked to, teens, like under 18, that see counselors, they hate the virtual counseling. They are much more likely and have openly said, I will tell my counselor in person way more than I'm going to tell them online.
Okay.
And again, that has to do with what they're worried about saying in the earshot of their families.
Right.
And or the people walking behind. It's the same concept that happens online with teenagers in school too. They're just so fearful of showing their faces, and a lot of times it's not because of even what's going on behind them. They're just like, I have a whole full face of acne and I'm not showing my face, or I don't feel good about myself today, so I don't want to show my face. I mean, teens are dealing with all of that. Like normally they would go to school and you'd sit and look at, like, describe it as, I'd sit and look at the back of someone's head in class, not sit and stare into the screen. And there's this little thing that I learned this last couple of weeks where on Zoom, teens then can pin someone on Zoom, making that so like a little bit of the cyber stalking world of this, that another teen can pin, or anyone can, adults too, it can happen in any of the Zoom thing. And then, so if there's 20 people on there, the teen can pin the person so that they're constantly always seeing that person up in the corner. And so, and pinning is good if you have a panel and you have 6 people that are going to be on a panel, you always want them to show up on the top and you pin them. But teens pinning other teens, that's awkward, and they know it's happening. So then it's one of the main reasons teens are leaving their cameras off in school, because they're just fearful that some other kid has pinned them and then like zoning it. And because you can zoom in and, you know, then they can take screenshots and they can do all kinds of mean, horrible things. So kids are fearful. One of the things that I've learned is that they do this. So then this is how they'll show up in class.
Right.
Tops of their head only, maybe eyeballs, and then back to the top. Yeah. Or again, most of them just leave them off. Right. And the teachers are really struggling with that, because the teachers want to see them, but kids don't want to show up that way. They're very anxious about it. And
well,
that raises
a whole other question about consent, right? Like we talk about consent, like consenting to be pinned or consenting to be screenshotted, or right, like like I don't, there's like nothing pops up in my Zoom like, do you consent for someone to screenshot you? Do you consent for someone to record you? Right? Like so that's a whole other level to that whole consent conversation that I think I haven't thought about till this moment right here, right? Like, and I wonder how many other people haven't thought about that aspect.
You've just invaded my space in a new way that we've not thought about, and that's what those teens feel. They feel like it's an invasion into, you know. And that's the other thing that, again, you and I don't know, this is because I was on a different call earlier today, but my virtual background, like I have to be very mindful of my virtual background, because I do have Harper walking back and forth during my calls a lot, just where my office is in the house, and she doesn't want to be seen in it. Well, with the virtual backgrounds too, we see, you know, a lot of teens don't want to show their background of their home, because again, it's like this comparison. One of the other things we've learned too is that it also shows the other teens where they're having to do it from. So like if I don't have Wi-Fi, I'm going to go to one of the high Wi-Fi hotspots in the community, and then therefore if I show my picture, I'm outing to my whole class that I'm at one of the Wi-Fi hotspots, which would be like the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Club, or the college students. I think about it too, that you know, some of them don't have Wi-Fi at home, or again, they've got a lot of family stuff going on at home, and so they're just very even cognizant of what's going on behind them, you know. And it's very uncomfortable. So you add all that up, and you just have a space where adults and teens and young people and older adults, we're just very deprived of that spirituality connected with our physical bodies and our physical sense of touch and relationship, relational ability to have a sense of what's kind of going on in our world around us. And so then it just, at the end of the day, people feel very, very overwhelmed with it, and don't even have a lexicon. They don't even have words that can describe it in a sense that many people might not even recognize what's happening to them, that they're isolating, falling deeper into like an anxious or depressive state, and or they can't pin it or describe it, or again have words for it if they've never had that kind of experience before. And so yeah, I feel like a lot, and then what happens, people just numb out, right? So if, I mean, I'm not doing research on this, but I know I have colleagues that are, and I haven't seen any studies yet, but I was just talking about this with one of my other colleagues in the psych department. I suspect we'll see a ginormous uptick in online forums, right? So like pornography. We know those places have seen a slight uptick. I haven't seen any stats that show like percentages or, I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar industry anyway, but I don't know what has happened to it in the 6 months. I couldn't speak to that today, but I'm sure I could dig around and find some research on it. We know that sex trafficking is still a big issue. We know there's been some hoaxes around it and some misinformation during COVID that has made it even worse for individuals that are trying to do the work. Human trafficking, I've got a student that works in Arizona this semester. She's an intern and she's doing human trafficking research and work and outreach. She used to do it here in La Crosse. And she was doing it all across this summer. So I know it's an issue in La Crosse, and we are a safe haven for a lot of human trafficked victims, like out of Chicago, particularly Milwaukee, south, like in Iowa. And so we are housing still a lot of people for that. And so I know that those are the more like darker areas of it. And then there's this sort of like middle ground. And then there's this like, you know, the general lack of skin hunger, skin touch, and
I think
and then it just kind of progressively.
Right. So around like the skin hunger, or just the people being in physical proximity to each other, like what we're seeing, or at least I'm seeing right now. My student was telling me today about people want a COVID holiday. So you go to the big party because you're having a COVID holiday. You just need a break from it. Or you hear about the quarantine dorm here at UWL where they're having these giant ragers in the basement, right? Like people who are supposed to be quarantining to keep themselves safe. You don't want to reinfect people, but they're having giant parties because people just need to connect, like, and it's and there's no other way for them to do it. And they were talking about the spirituality aspect, and like you were talking about skin hunger, and the thought that came to my mind was like in Corinthians, the gifts of the Spirit, like the laying on of hands. Like, so I'm trying to think of like what spiritually are people going to need once this is all done, right? Like it's going to be speaking, laying on of hands. Like we need physical touch, we need physical proximity. We need the prophetic voice of speaking truth to power. Like you screwed up the COVID response, right? Like we need speaking in tongues. Like we need to be able to talk honestly to each other about the experience we just all went through. And I'm wondering about the ways in which churches, synagogues, mosques, support groups, AA groups, etc., campus ministries can position themselves to help create those conversations. So that, because I mean, you were just saying that, you know, the next epidemic is like the 6 months after this, how we deal with it. You know, and I have a 5-year-old who will lay on the couch crying once a week because of the COVIDs, right? Like this is going to be with them for a long time. We're story-formed people. The story of this is going to shape several generations for a while.
And the best thing we can do is learn from previous generations of how what they did or didn't do after the pandemic of 1918, what they did or didn't do after, you know, what we did or didn't do after the HIV AIDS pandemic in the 80s and 90s, and how it just isolated people, and people were so terrified about sexuality and talking about it. And every teen that was born out of that post-pandemic area was born out of like, if you have sex, you're going to die, you're going to have AIDS, sex equals AIDS, death. And so the same thing out of like pandemic of this generation, we're gonna have multiple layers of it, from death due to racism, death due to the actual virus, death to lack of health care, death to a lack of isolation and mental health. And so I think it's going to take a web of our organizations at a grassroots level. So, and then a top roots level and top leaves down. And so I think it's going to take a web of organizations coming together, and I think each can add those layers to that. I think about it as like a giant net, and thinking about, well, where are the holes going to be? And so like the churches and the spirituality centers and the and then the student organizations, and then the community organizations, the YMCAs, the Boys and Girls. I mean, every part of them have a part of the net that they're going to have to put, fix and create a nice big net for everyone to fall back on. And it's going to take everyone. And so the churches and the organizations that are working on it from a spiritual level can come up with a series of events, workshops, support groups, and be ready that the second the doors can fling open, I mean, that's going to be the thing. The second it's safe and people really get the word that we have eradicated this, that we are, in a safe zone, it's never going to be completely gone, but that the doors are going to be open and people are going to be so happy to gather. And I see it as a way that we kind of transition back to it slowly already, as much as we can start doing in small groups of 6, right? We know 6 can gather socially distant, and then we can add 12, and then we can add 18, and then we can add 24, and then we can have rooms of hundreds again. And it's going to be slow, but I think organizations can start now thinking ahead. And in the meantime, continue to offer things and know that you might have nobody come.
Right.
But I think that sometimes just the knowing that those things exist in a community, even if I'm not able to attend it right now personally, knowing that it's there, I know I can reach out if I need it, or I know I can fall back to it when I get to that tipping point of, man, I am so desperate and I need to be there. Right. And then the problem is if people keep offering and people keep not coming, and then we shut it down, then we have a giant hole and right. in the net. And so I think even though it feels like another thing, another space, oh my gosh, it's another Zoom meeting, I think having it and continuing to promote it and advertise it and support it, that's the best things our churches, our schools, our YMCAs, our yeah.
And I think a lot about the way in which this crisis affects the organizations that are so essential, right? Like, so we know that 1 in 4 churches will close down after this. We know that a lot of nonprofits are going to struggle. We know that like the Seven Winners LGBT Center is struggling with their donations right now as well. So all these organizations, like you said, people aren't coming to Will at
Yep.
Pride Center, people aren't coming to us at Common Ground. So we have all these places that have so much to offer after all this, but going through it is going to put us in a position where it might be hard, right? Like
yep.
if 1 in 4 churches close down, that's 1 in 4 of my donor base, right? That's a quarter of my donor base, right? Like,
yep.
So we're all here, we want to do the work, but the resources are strained.
Yep.
And that's going to put more stress on the people who need the help. And
yep.
It's just this weird, vicious cycle.
Yep. Yep. And that's where working as organizations to, look for funding, continue to look for soft dollars, grants. I have I have 2 grant classes. If you want me to start, if you want a team of grant writers that want to help you write grants, let me know. I'll send one your way.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Okay. I'll send you a team. I will literally, you'll have a team of 3 people. You'll have to meet them on Zoom, but they're reared and ready to go. Okay, so that would be really good because I'm kind of short on organizations that are, normally I have 25 organizations that need funding. I know organizations need funding. I just know their bandwidth is like at the max, like you said, but it's almost for you thinking about, well, what 6 months from now will I need funding for? What 3 months from now will I need funding for? And this team of students can help you write the proposal, and they just get it all done. They put the budget together, they do everything, they find the funders. So I'll give you a team. You'll have one by Monday.
You're my new hero. You've been my hero before, you're my hero again.
Yep, I will send you a team. I might even send you 2 teams, and you could put them on 2 different projects or something of that nature if you think of it. But I think, yeah, and I think you're right. I think it's just staying the course, and it's really being creative and like you're doing, reaching out to other thoughtful leaders that are doing work in other spaces and other parts of the nation even, and then how can we replicate? What can we do? I constantly feel like we don't have to reinvent a new wheel, but maybe someone in New York is already figuring out how to do this, or someone in Seattle is figuring out how to do this and bring people together, or Deep South, who knows, and then we just continue to be there. And sometimes I think in these times too, some people are looking for alternative ways of even getting the information. So if you normally always had a support group online, maybe it's now sending out a newsletter once a week that they can read on their own. They can print it out and read it. Maybe it's 5-minute videos that go out every Monday, the hot tip of the week, that they can watch whenever they want to, or, and it can, there's other things too, that it's, just coming up creatively with meeting kind of people where they're at. And if they continue to hear and see that you're there, I think they will, it's like a safety net. I know it's there and it will open again, or I can be there. And again, if it's 1 or 2 people that just help spread that word, that's the immediate thing that can be really, I think, impactful. Yeah.
So, and what is your feeling about what students need, like right now? I mean, the ones who are in lockdown, the ones who are off campus, the ones that have gone home, like, what is your feeling of, like, what do people need? Like, spiritually, sexually, emotionally, like the whole gamut, like what is the need for this community that we're in at this moment?
One of the biggest things I think they need is hope. I think they need to hear hope. I think they need to hear the messages that they're going to get through this. This is, it sounds trite, but it's like, this is going to pass. It's going to pass like a kidney stone, but it's going to pass. And I think, I feel a lot of them feel very hopeless at the end of the day. They feel so overwhelmed and consumed. So then they hit this paralysis, and then they literally are paralyzed. So what do? I do the most mundane, like I have students that say, well, then I just clean out a drawer. I watch Netflix for 3 hours instead of doing this homework. Or instead of reaching out for a friend. I think they need to hear messages of hope. I think they need to hear stories. I think they need to hear stories of how people are coming through this. So whether those are a place where they can share anonymous stories that can be reshared, if people are really willing to be interviewed and have their story told. I think stories of hope right now of how this will, and whether those are even historical stories of pulling out historical things. We've done a lot with that with our public health students, of talking about the pandemic of 1918. And just reminding them that their great grandparents, they did it. They went through this. They didn't go to school for 1.5 years. They didn't, and I think they need to know that, I think one of the other things we hear over and over is that they do need spaces for fun and connection. So where I don't have to show up and do something, but I can show up and just listen, or I can show up and have one prompt that's gonna, right. We're gonna talk about it and it's I think that so many of the things that they have to show up for, this college students you have to show up and listen to this class for 1.5 hours, or you have to show up and do this homework, or everything's so task driven online because of the way that online classes are. And I think that
that's one thing I miss right now with the ministry that we do here, is that I used to do, come have a meal, and we'll have a games night, we'll have a conversation. It was just a space to like hang and talk about big questions and eat food, and we just can't do that right now.
Yep.
And again, that's one of those, like, one of the gifts that I feel like we have to offer people that we can't
Yep.
use at this current moment.
Yep. And we know a lot of them are suffering for financial things too, like food security is a big thing we've heard of in our survey that we did this week. So making sure that they know how to use the food pantry on campus. So I think that cross promotion of you being able to cross promote the food pantry, or, you know, Will being able to cross promote your stuff. I think there needs to be a lot more like sharing of like intertwining resources, because I need to now direct about 50 students to the food bank on campus, and then we need to get people delivering stuff to the food bank on campus, or getting them to use Hunger Task Force, or, you know, make sure that they're signing up for SNAP right now, if they qualify. And so, and letting them know that there's no shame, there's no stigma in these things, there's no, you need help. And we kept using the mantra with our students this last week, lean out. You know how the whole world always says lean in? Well, if you don't have anyone to lean in on, like your support system is your family, but you can't lean in on them, you got to lean out. And so we kept using this mantra and this like messaging of lean out. And the number of students that reached out to faculty after we did that, we had over 150 some, we had 100, I don't know, 155 students show up to our an hour-long majors gathering last Thursday, and every one of them were, when we all got off, a lot of the faculty were reached out to individually that were advisors, and we just got so many messages of hope and thanks, and oh my gosh, we feel that you're there. Then we followed it up with an anonymous survey that they could fill out where they could really share what they needed. And a lot of them are really struggling with organization too. This online world creates a whole level of just, like just trying to organize yourself online. You know, email is just, their emails are inundated, their online canvas. I think a lot of them are struggling with sort of like that ADD. If they have ADD, it's almost worsened. If they didn't have it before, they're wondering if they struggle with it. They're struggling with like tension, headaches, that kind of stuff. So I think what you were talking about, like the hands-on, and like, we're going to need to be prepared with lots of healers, Reiki healers, massage therapists. So I think about when you can gather spaces, having like fun events where you can come and you can get a massage and you can get social connection and spiritual connection. You can come and get, like, our massage therapists are going to be back in business very soon. And I know there's a few that are doing it safely, but I know people are not very comfortable going right now to those kinds of things. But
well, you're talking about the organization aspect. Like, I know as a person with ADHD, at times of stress, anxiety, or if I'm trying to force myself to concentrate on a crisis or homework or whatever, like that frontal lobe shuts down.
yeah,
Right. Like the more you try to think, the less you can.
yeah.
I wonder, like, especially when you were talking, I wonder if like all the neurotypicals are now like going through what people like myself go through all the time. Right. And like, and to which my answer is get up and go for a walk, but get up and go for a walk when you're, you know, in lockdown inside your building, or you have to be cautious about where you're walking and how many people are near you walking, right? Like it's, but yeah, it's almost, like I said, it's almost like an ADHD thing. I don't like using ADHD as a negative because
I don't either, but because it's not, it's, a lot of students asked, they said, well, how would I get tested for that? Because I'm worried that I have it now, like it's a virus that you get, and then you take a medicate, you know, and they know that. And so I do worry too a little bit about that, not worry, I know we're going to see an uptick in students trying medications, trying other alternative substances to try to mitigate some of these feelings and try to numb, you know. So the sharing of Adderall, the sharing of medication, the sharing of edibles, the sharing, whatever it is, we know this is going to be an uptick of that. Alcohol consumption as a way to numb out, a way to, you know, so we know all these things that could be a healthy thing could also then divert into a very poor coping mechanism for something that they just can't even name. And so those neurotypical like attributes that they can't put words to because they've not even ever experienced this in their life before, whether they're 5 or 15 or 25 or 45 or 85, we need to help them with that too, and helping them have spaces where you can openly talk about it. And I think just the more we share stories, the more we the more other people are willing to share their stories with how they're coping with it, the better off we're going to help other people get through it.
Well, and you're talking about the people using the self-medicating aspect.
Yep.
And we code as a culture that like how you deal with stress is
Yep.
that you turn off your brain by overdoing a substance of some kind, right? We don't
Yep.
have this narrative of like, I'm going through stress, I'm gonna have a cup of tea, go for a walk, and like get my shit together. Like our
Yep.
code is let's drink ourselves until we fall down and
Yep.
our minds go black, right? Like,
Yep.
and lacrosse in particular has a very weird drinking culture compared to
Yep.
other places I've been. Like when I was in Portland, Oregon,
Yep.
you had friends, you had a beer, you had dinner, life was good, right?
Yeah.
Here, I know 45-year-olds are like, oh yeah, I get drunk every Friday. Like,
Yeah.
what? That's not a thing I've encountered as widespread before.
Yep.
But so the baseline culture here in lacrosse is you're in a time of stress or anxiety. So
Drink.
let's get self-destructive.
Yep.
And
100%.
how do you shift the whole culture towards healthier practice? Like,
Yep.
And
we see a lot of that with adults and teens right now. They're just like, well, screw it. Might as well just go do. And that, I mean, this past weekend, I think we're going to see a spike after this last weekend of that, because people are just so tired. And it's just that pandemic fatigue that hits in, and just people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And then that's their way of opting out and coping with it. And it's destructive. And we will continue to see more of that as guidelines clamp down, as schools continue to be virtual. I predict that, I mean, I know we've seen the Catholic schools go back to online, or go to online, because they've had such a surge in the last couple of weeks. We've had other outlying schools. We've had the lacrosse school district that's going to stay virtual another 2 weeks. I predict they'll just probably be virtual the whole time. Yeah, so I think it's gonna really have an outpouring of effect that way, and so I know in the spaces of mental health, not only mental health, but substance abuse counselors and the substance use counselors and our treatment facilities are preparing. They're gearing up. Our Alliance to Heal, our organizations that are working on whether that's heroin use, or if we're looking at our homeless population, we're looking at housing issues in our community because of job loss. I mean, those things will continue to rise. And again, we have to have a whole net, and every part of the net has to have these things to catch people on, and every sort of pocket. And it's going to take everyone woven together to create a nice big space for everyone to fall back on. And that's just in our little lacrosse county. And then you think about the state, and then you think about neighboring states. And again, I just think we can learn from other states that have been through it, back in April, when New York went through it heaviest in the beginning, and Washington. And now I think we have a lot to learn from even those folks who have done things well out there, and then recouped and recovered, and now they're in their third wave. And I have colleagues in both those states that have just really shared good teaching tools and tricks and what's happening in their county. And I think getting yourself networked really well as a leader in the space you're in, and then just constantly having conversations like this and sticking together where we can.
Yeah. And you were talking earlier about things that give us hope. And one of the things I did like when this whole crisis, the virus first started being a thing, was watching a global international response to it. Right? Like, when else in history we had a pandemic where every country in the world could start at the same time to respond to it? And that was kind of right.
Yep.
Like, because Spanish flu, we didn't have everybody responding at one time. It took a while, but now we can use the internet and get everybody coordinated, and that was kind of cool.
Yep, we don't have to rely on horse and buggy.
Right.
Yeah, I know. So, okay, I actually have to pop off and help another child do another event, but
okay, I was about to wrap up anyway, so it's all good.
Perfect.
I will, once I have the video all edited and put out, I will let you know, and you can go through your network as well. And
okay, let's do it. So. And then I will share with you where I'm going to forward on some of the other things that you're doing too in our public health group. And I think just staying connected that way too, with more things that you're doing. I just keep passing them on to students and our public, and our Facebook page and those those things help. So continue to send them my way if you're thinking of
I will.
things too.
Definitely,
Okay.
definitely. And send your grant writer people to me.
You're going to have a team Monday. I'm so excited.
Nice.
Maybe 2.
Awesome. I love it.
Okay. I love it too. This is awesome. Thanks, Jason. All right.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Bye.